Hi, everybody. This is the final session in Zoom Room B of the whole weekend, and it's going to be a great one. Those of you who know Patricia Walsh will know she's an expert in her field. She trained as a deep memory process regression practitioner. I had to read that out. That's a mouthful. And her book is brilliant and it's very extremely popular. Students just can't get enough of it. It's called Understanding Karmic Complexes, and it was written 10 years ago or published 10 years ago by Wessex. And Patricia's websites that she's got here: Heal the Past, Kairos Astrology, and Soulwise Astrology School. And Patricia's always somewhere teaching, being one of the evangelists of karmic astrology. And we're really delighted to have you here. So thank you so much for closing the conference. I'll leave it to you, Patricia. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Frank. Always a pleasure. Too bad I can't be there in person, but here we are. Okay, so after that wonderful introduction, I'm just going to tell you what I'd like to do in this session. Um, Thematic with the workshop about the past and the future intertwined, I'm going to describe to you, specifically from the evolutionary astrology perspective, what are complexes. So we'll start with present life complexes and then move to what a karmic complex might look like. And then in the second part of the workshop, I'm going to take you on an experiential where you'll get to meet some of your own complexes, and we'll find some resources and ways to help you bring some of it to completion. And even if it's not full completion, it's to bring something from the deeper recess of your consciousness or subconscious to life so that you can have a greater understanding of your own psyche, as all these things live so deeply buried within our consciousness. All right, I'm trying to move slides. There we go. So William Faulkner, many people quote this. I will quote him again. The past is never dead. It's not even past. So when you think about that, just like this picture, I love this picture. It's like we mostly identify with our conscious selves, and here we are looking forward, right? We often don't even look in the present. We're looking forward. We're moving forward so much, looking to what's coming, and how we can get on with life, that we leave the past behind. And we think because we leave it behind that it's past. And this is what Faulkner's saying. It's not. In this image, we see, in essence, a representation from birth to death in a single life. All of this is living within us. And generally living within us are the kind of high points. And unfortunately, so we have high points in life that are rapturous and joyful, where we have some breakthroughs, however you want, whatever these things are. And those imprint very deeply on the subconscious. But unfortunately, so does trauma. And trauma imprints on the subconscious, kind of flash freezing these moments. And they live within us. They get buried in the subconscious. We're not aware of them. We're looking forward. We think it's dead. We think it's past, but it's not. And the interesting dynamic of the subconscious is that to the subconscious mind, everything is happening now. So even though your conscious mind thinks it's past and you've moved beyond it, it's not. There's some play still going on. I'm going to explain this dynamic as I move along, but it's still living in the subconscious. So to the subconscious, everything is happening now. It's only the conscious mind that's aware of past, present, and future. Okay, so Jung said that a complex forms where we experience a defeat in life. And as this image shows, here you are on the treadmill, right? Using your Mars energy, wanting to lose those pounds, and something is blocking you, right? Our Mars energy, we can liken it very much to our will. And I use the word libido, libido is not necessarily, even though in society we use it as a representation of sexual energy, it's not only about sexual energy. Libido is life force, and we're all filled with life force. We all have a Mars. We have a Mars somewhere. And our life force wants us, just like Mars, get out of my way, I'm moving forward, I'm doing something, I'm accomplishing something. Our Mars is also a protective function. As we know, Mars can rule weapons and war and weaponry, but within us, it's our protection. It's our instinctual protection. Just like an animal, if an animal gets cornered, the first thing it's going to do is bare its teeth, show its claws, and posture to protect itself. This is what our Mars does on a very deep instinctual level for us. When our Mars function is blocked, when our Mars function is thwarted, when our libidinal life force is trying to do something and becomes blocked, this is what Jung was talking about. A complex forms right in that moment. Now, in psychology, we would call this moment, usually it's a trauma. Something blocks you, something thwarts you, something pushes you down. Um, the example I always like to use, which is an unfortunate example, but unfortunately it's very true in our society, is that, let's say, of an abused child. So let's say there's a little girl, boy, 4 years old, 5 years old, and a parent is abusive, yelling at them, beating them, cornering them. This child is too young to protect itself, right? Too young to run, too young to fight. In this moment, when this trauma happens, a part of that child's life force becomes frozen in time. So it becomes frozen because it can't fight, it can't flight. This is what in psychology is called the formation of, as Jung called, a complex, but also the formation of PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder. And in that moment, when this Mars function within us, when this will cannot fight, cannot flight, it freezes. This is the trauma response. It freezes and it gets driven underground. And all the impulses that were there that wanted to protect, again, back to the example of our 4 or 5-year-old child, wanted to fight or wanted to flight, couldn't. That life force, that will is overcome, it freezes and takes all of those impulses with it underground, buried in the human psyche. And when it gets buried like that, it's blocked from consciousness. Now it's living in the underworld terrain, in the chthonic depths of our psyche. But with it are all of those initial impulses, those very instinctual, very instinctual responses. And they don't go away. Just because they're not in your conscious mind, they don't go away. They live there, like I said, in this little bubble, right? And as I describe some of the dynamics of how these complexes live on within your consciousness, they live in this little bubble with all of the emotions and the thoughts and the feelings and the impulses from that original moment when you were unable to do what it was that you needed to do. Now, the example that I gave you of a child being abused, very traumatic moment, trauma is not always that severe or that overt. It can be emotional trauma. A lover leaves you. Somebody betrays you, somebody cheats on you, you're embarrassed, you're shamed publicly. All of these things can form complexes, and there's a whole variety of complexes, which you can look up. I don't have time to go through all of them. And in fact, basically anything that constellates within the subconscious with this kind of impact can be considered a complex. Now, complexes are often described as a core pattern of emotions and memories and perceptions and impulses and wishes that constellate around a common theme. So for example, like I said, the child who was abused, the theme in that moment, whatever that child was feeling, which was, I want to fight, I want to protect myself, quite frequently the energy turns in on oneself where a child would blame themselves. I was bad, I was wrong, right? And that would all constellate around. So this theme then lives on in their life, right? They continue to move forward in life with this, I'm bad, I'm wrong, I deserve to be punished, because their outward moving Mars has turned inwards. You know, people often say that even in pop psychology, that, you know, depression is energy turned inwards, right? It's our will turned inwards. So when Jung talked about complexes, he said they have a feeling tone. They have, and feeling tone, another word for it is affect. Affect means a strong charge. And like I said, the complexes we're mostly concerned about are the ones that are kind of stuck in our psyche and controlling us, right? Like your inferiority complex or your whatever. You know, we take it so literally that it is who we are, but it's not, right? It's just I'm not saying it's just a complex, but it's a complex constellated within the psyche. At the core of complexes, Jung also talked about complexes that they have archetypes at the core. And this is where we kind of cross over into understanding complexes from an astrological perspective. Now, if you want a whole run of what I've discerned as karmic complexes from my practice in regression therapy for 20 some odd years, you can look at my book, because I wrote about complexes by astrological archetype, and I'll get into that in a minute in a slide. But for example, we can take an archetype that's non-astrological, like say mother, right? Mother is an archetype. It can be divine mother. It could be, you know, just the ideal mother. That's a collective experience, right? As Jung said, an archetype is like a river that forms a water course of human experience, and then it creates a riverbed, and all human experience continues to flow through that water course. This is the formation of an archetype. Which lives, like I said, in the collective unconscious within your subconscious. Now you have the collective and universal experience of mother, but then you also have your personal experience of mother, right? And generally they don't end up being like a divine mother or ideal mother. And that's where we get complexes, like somebody might say you have a mother complex or a father complex. So your memory and your experience of mother will inform your personal experience of that archetype. Yet there is also a deeper archetype to be explored through your subconscious to the collective unconscious. That might be a little too complex, but let me just stop and see were there any questions coming through.
There aren't at the moment, no.
Okay, good. Great. You can always rewatch it. So at the core of your personal complex, just to summarize, we have, let's say, again, negative complexes that imprint us. You have a wound. You have thwarted impulses. Like I said, fight or flight, run, flee. Even if it's not an overt complex like that, it's a broken heart, get that lover back, how they betrayed me, all of those things. You have unexpressed emotion. Quite frequently, the emotion gets suppressed because it's so huge, it's so overwhelming. We're very good in society, specifically women in society, not allowed to be angry, right? So where does all that anger go? Where does all that healthy Mars libidinal energy go? Underground, right? So it's in the core of a complex. We have unresolved conflicts within complexes as well. As well as if you have conflicts, that's also can point to a complex. Now, an interesting thing about complexes are that they can play out two ways. We can overdo a complex or we can underdo a complex. For example, let's take an inferiority complex. If somebody has an inferior, now you have a Pluto and Virgo in the 6th house, so I have a double signature of, and that would be quite a Virgo thing, right? Could also be a Libra thing. But for example, the overt expression of it would be very Virgo. So I'm Pluto Virgo in the 6th house, so I came in with big inferiority complex in this lifetime. Now, one can be controlled by that complex by underdoing it or playing out an inferiority complex, like not feeling good enough and overtly showing that. Another person could play out an inferiority complex and overdo it, meaning always pushing to be noticed, always pushing to be out there. And this is where we get these dichotomies or splits within our psyche, right? When it's incongruous, when we have a conflict, where we feel inside, inwardly different than how we are showing ourselves. This is a persona, right? We call this persona, but it's also a defense. So somebody who's overdoing a complex can be in a defense. They can be in a defense against feeling the feeling of that inferiority. So therefore they're projecting, it's actually the defense is called compensation. They're projecting a sense of, confidence. So interesting, you're in a complex when you find yourself overdoing something which isn't congruous with the way that you feel inside, or underdoing it and collapsing within on oneself and then being controlled by the complex. Now, complexes also can take over your psyche. And, we see examples like this, like road rage, right? That's or something triggers you and when we use this language, right? I don't know what just took over me. This is content from the subconscious that can flood your conscious mind, and you temporarily become something that you think you're not, right? Again, back to that picture, your conscious mind is like looking forward, putting on this mask, this persona, you're in your defense, you're moving along, being who you think you are. And then all of a sudden, something comes out of you, like some rage or some sadness or some impatience or irritant or something like that, that you would kind of look at yourself and go, wow, I just got taken over by something. You're in a complex then. Complexes are also repetitive in nature because, and I'll show you in the next slide where this is, give you some different examples of the structure of complexes. So any questions so far? I think I saw some things flying by in chat.
Yes, there was one from Alex that said, are all memories complexes?
No, there's a difference between a complex and an issue. Again, a complex is something that is like, again, so you can have a memory of somebody not paying attention to you, and it didn't constellate as a complex. It was just, that person didn't pay attention to me. Or you can have a memory or a moment in your life where somebody didn't pay attention to you and it was embarrassing. That may constellate as a complex, right? I'm getting back to, say, an inferiority complex, or somebody didn't, and I'm going to give you an example where I think it'll become clearer. Anything else?
Thank you. There was one from Milia that I wasn't sure what she meant. Would you consider the actual situation as a complex, but all over for everybody? So I'm going to ask her to clarify what that means, because I'm not quite sure at the moment.
Okay.
Okay. That's it.
Okay. So let me talk about the structure of complexes. And this is where it starts to get interesting. Complexes are autonomous. This was something that Jung found out and described quite clearly, that because they are either wholly or partially split off from your conscious self or your perception of yourself, your ego, right? I'm using the word ego here, but ego is our consistent self-image, right? Ego is how we view ourselves. We wake up every day, I wake up every day as Patricia. I'm kind of the same person I was yesterday, right? My whole identity doesn't change. This is our ego. We all need an ego. We like self-consistency. Um, but these parts that then, because you can't live in, that 4-year-old child can't live in terror, right? If she was in the corner and father was yelling at her, screaming at her, she was terrified maybe. You can't live in terror all the time, which is why the psyche splits these parts off, right? It's for survival. And we all have them. We all have them buried inside us. Because they're split off from the consciousness, they kind of have a life of their own. This is what Jung meant by they're autonomous. They're beyond the control of our ego. They're beyond our conscious control. They have a life of their own, and they can be met as inner characters. And this is an exercise I'm going to take you on later. We're going to meet one of these inner characters and find out more about this part of yourself and what we can do to help this part of yourself move on. So because they're having their inner life, they're kind of like, okay, so for example, we might say you have an inner critic or you have an inner judge, and maybe that part of you formed from your upbringing, right? Maybe you were always told you were wrong or you were stupid and you interjected that. And that's a voice living inside you, like an inner character. This is how, so we can get, and you think that's part of you, right? You think it's part of you, but it's not. It's a voice you've internalized. We can get to know that part of you by exploring that part of you like an inner character. Hold on a minute. I actually have to stop a minute because my dog is barking. Okay, I'm just going to pause and I will be right back.
Thanks, Patricia.
Okay. Think up some questions. Does anybody have a question now?
The question that I didn't understand, it was actually about COVID, and Milia feels that it's creating a complex in a whole group of people or maybe a whole society, and wondered if you felt that as well.
Yes, absolutely. It's a collective trauma, and different people will be experiencing different things. Some people, as we can see, increased suicide rates, increased depression from lockdown. Children may be experiencing isolation. Absolutely, yes. I would say it definitely can be collective, but then there's an individual expression of how that collective experience is imprinting on one's psyche.
And thank you, this may be one that you mentioned later, but Lucy asks, what can you do about your complex when you don't know what the memory is of where it comes from?
Yeah, well, that's part of opening it up. I mean, generally, if it's a really repressed memory of a serious traumatic event, these are the kinds of things that you want to do, you know, in the context of a session with somebody who's trained to do that. You don't want to open up repressed memories just willy-nilly.
Okay, that's it for now. Thank you.
Okay, so Jung interestingly talked about complexes like he used the word node, like a node buried in the psyche. And the way that he saw it was like it's like a knot, right? It's hardened, and this answers a little bit like the question before. This knot, like your meeting like this, has to be opened to find out what's inside the complex, right? And it can be opened slowly. Sometimes a complex can crash through to the conscious mind, being buried, can crash through when a similar event happens. This is what this next point is. They arise from the unconscious and they dissipate after the affect is discharged. This is when unwanted subconscious material ruptures through to the conscious mind, And you don't, for example, anxiety is one of those, right? So let's go back to somebody who has maybe panic attacks. This is definitely subconscious material that somebody doesn't want to be, in the moment with whatever they're being triggered with. But when you're triggered with something, let's say a panic attack, maybe somebody almost drowned, right, when they were young. And this whole, I can't breathe, I'm suffocating, I'm drowning, kind of stuff happened. And then, later on in life, it's repressed. They get on, they move on, which is what we're supposed to do. And then that anxiety gets displaced onto, let's say, any situation where they feel out of control, which is quite common with the roots of anxiety. So then they feel out of control, and then anxiety is triggered. But what's breaking through from the subconscious to the conscious isn't, of course, the whole memory of being, of almost drowning. It's the affect, what I was talking about before, the panic, I'm out of control. It's life-threatening. I'm gonna die. This is this is when it's unfinished in the subconscious, yet it pokes through from any kind of circumstance where that person might feel out of control. Because complexes are always seeking to be expressed. They want to be completed. They don't want to be cast into the depths of the subconscious and ignored, like any of us do, right? These parts of our psyche do want to be completed, yet they need to be completed within a healthy container, right? This is what the dynamics of PTSD are. Men that go to war and come back, this, again, a very overt example where they're just, anything can trigger them into either, that fight or flight response because they were so overwhelmed with, bombs exploding and bullets and watching people die. And a car backfiring on the road can send them instantly back to the affect. They don't always have the memory, although, again, this is much too complex for this lecture, but the memory can be fragmentary. It can be just flashes of something. So complexes are also, they also show black and white thinking, because often that part of our consciousness feels it's a life or death scenario. And when we're in this narrowed focus, when we're in this part of like, I've got to survive, our thinking gets very narrowed and black and white. And like I said before, we can underdo a complex or we can overdo a complex, right? And the underdoing or the overdoing generally relates to the kind of defense that we have around the complex. They are repetitive because they're always seeking to be expressed. They're rooted in some kind of traumatic experience, like I was talking about. This is present life, but also goes back to past life. They can be compulsive in nature, resistant to change, and they're different than an issue. Like I have an issue with, people who cut me off in line, right? Or they have a gravity. If somebody cuts you off in line and you go into a rage, then maybe that's a complex and not just an issue. And as I said, they're easily triggered by like circumstance. We often think of memory as linear, and that it's like this record or recording of everything that happened to you. That's a part of memory, but most of memory is associative, right? Like I always use the example of, you smell cookies baking and it goes back to when you were a little girl at grandma's house or little boy at grandma's house, where you hear a song where you're made your first kiss. Memory is associative, right? Or a function of memory is associative. This is the part of us that causes like situation to trigger deeper content. And again, these things I said before, they have a strong affect, they're highly charged, physically, emotionally, and they're cemented in place by these thoughts that were happening at the moment of the complex, when the complex was formed. Okay, questions? Things flashing by?
No, not at the moment. Thank you.
Okay, great. So I love this quote. because it gives us a picture of this multigenous inner world that we have that we're not always aware of. He says, I'm one powerful self made up of so many selves that sometimes I throw myself a get acquainted party. And this is actually what we need to do. Again, we don't like to think of ourselves as multiple, but we are. We have many selves. And these many selves, the longer that they stay or when they're split off from our consciousness, when they're kept there, locked back there in the past, in the subconscious, they need to come out and get invited to the party. And this is part of what it means to explore, to explore these parts of our psyche that are buried. Okay, let's talk about karmic complexes. Again, I saw somebody raise their hand. Is there anything that needs to be said?
There are a couple of questions, if you're happy to
Sure,
answer.
go ahead.
Could a trauma from pre-birth, could it be a trauma from pre-birth that happened in the womb?
Absolutely. Yes, in fact, I do regression therapy, and quite frequently, like I said, memory is associative. And I'm going to give you an example in a moment where you can tie it all together. But our current life situations are often replays of our past life situations, which is what this slide shows. And I'll explain to you in a moment what this means. And that all starts in the womb, right? It all gets imprinted. Or re-imprinted in the womb, but it's actually much of what happens when you're in the womb to mother and to her surroundings and to your psyche at the time. Much of what's re-imprinted then is a re-imprinting of your own personal karma that you bring in. I often say also it's up until the first Saturn return where we are kind of re-imprinting a lot of our past life experiences and re-imprinting them symbolically. Sometimes literally, sometimes symbolically.
And there's one more, if you're happy with that. Well, it's just from Natalino says, uh, the it's what the trauma causes us to do, and how it drives our behavior. Would that be the first thing that you treat? The actual result, I think he means.
How it manifests in your life. Well, we always want to start with how things are manifesting in your life, right? Like even if you're coming in to do regression therapy, we want to start with how it's manifesting in your life. So it would be, and that's the opening to the deeper subconscious, at least in the way that I work, right? So, let's say it's a fear of public speaking. I used to have that one, by the way, believe it or not, but I healed it with regression. But yeah, I had a terrible fear of public speaking. It's a very common one. Um, and yeah, we want to start with that. So I would start with what happens in that moment. My heart's pounding, my palms are sweating. And we can go into that and use that like a Google search into the subconscious, and then go directly to the core of the complex. Affect, like I said, the strong affect is what gets you there. But again, when you do it, it's not like you're being, it's very Pluto terrain, right? You can get kidnapped into the underworld like Persephone, right? That's when we get taken over by subconscious content, or you can go willingly, like Inanna when she went into the underworld, right? She listened, she put her ear to the ground and heard a greater calling and went into the initiation. So there's two ways to do it. You can constantly get re-triggered and re-triggered and re-triggered, and then try to suppress it and move on with your life, or you can willingly follow it. But again, the container for exploration of these things is important, because that's how we bring them to completion. It needs to happen within a healthy container, a therapeutic healing container. Okay, let me move on and just describe the dynamics of karmic complexes and how you might start to discern them in the charts. In Vedanta, or in the Hindu understanding of the human psyche, when they talk about karma, in the West, we often think of karma as this kind of black and white, I did something bad and now something bad's going to happen to me. That's actually a very Judeo-Christian overlay of how it's actually perceived in the East. So I've broken this down into some correlations of how we look at it in the chart. Um, in Vedanta, there's an understanding that karma arises from something that's called a samskara. And a samskara is like a psychic scar tissue. It's where you've been wounded in the past, and now I'm moving out of current life into past lives, where you've been wounded in the past and you've been unable to complete something, unable to, and you died with it. Right? Our moment of death is often very critical in past lives and how that carries forward in the soul, especially if it's a traumatic death. But we can also have moments within past lives, just like in this lifetime. In fact, everything that applies to your current life applies to your past life selves. Yet they're deeper buried in the subconscious. So if you think getting, how your complexes, your current life complexes can become buried, past life complexes are buried within those complexes, like Russian dolls, right? This is a picture of our psyche. So a samskara is then something that where you've been wounded in the past, and it's formed this kind of scar tissue. Freud actually noticed this about complexes, where he said that they have a tendency to repeat themselves, and he called it repetition compulsion, right? It's where a trauma will continue. It's because of this furrow in the psyche. Something is unfinished. The consciousness keeps returning to it. It wants to complete it. It wants to complete it. Yet it happens in this kind of like the record stuck, so it replays. This is what happens in our many, many, many lives. And while, like I said, we think of karma quite frequently as this, retributive kind of, like I said, Old Testament Judeo-Christian, eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth thing, it's not. I would say 90% of your karma is numb repetition. Just like Freud said, when a trauma is experienced, the psyche will continue to repeat it. So for example, back to our 4-year-old child who was abused by father, quite frequently, there's again, 2 ways that might manifest later in life for that person. One might be where the abused becomes the abuser. That's a defense, right? So nobody will ever get to me again, so I'm going to attack everybody and become a bully myself. Or, one can shut down, again, thinking of how the complex forms, and then form continual relationships with abusive people, or abusive scenarios, or abusive work situations, or whatever it is, right? Either way, that complex is still playing out and running that person's life. This is the repetition, the compulsion that Freud talked about. The psyche continues to replay and replay and replay until you can go in and bring it to completion. And again, in my work, what I would do with somebody like that is we would go back to childhood in regression, and she would become that little girl again. And then she would be able to finish what's unfinished within the psyche. And when you can finish what's unfinished in the psyche, it dissipates. It releases the locked libidinal energy. And that may be screaming at father, or punching him, or kicking, or running away, or whatever she needed to do. But until that happens, again, because again, like I said, to the subconscious and to the soul, everything is happening now. I'd like to say that soul and subconscious are synonymous to a certain degree. And so we have current life memory of deeper memory. Okay, so samskara then can be, so we have these wounds, they repeat life after life after life. 90% of your karma is numb repetition. You were abandoned in a past life, you come into another life with another version of abandonment, you go into another life with another version of abandonment until you bring it to completion. So that's about 90% of your karma. So now a samskara can go into what they call a klesha. or an aspect of samskara is klesha. It's these negative, emotionally laden thoughts that were formed at the point of the trauma or after that. Like, for example, your lover cheats on you and your heart's broken and you collapse in on yourself. And then you say, men, let's say it's a woman, men can't be trusted, right? And within that phrase comes this shutdown, this defeat, this defense. That's a negative, emotionally laden thought that's formed because of a trauma. And that cements this in place. Well, this happens in current life as well as past lives. So in the moment of the trauma, somebody's thinking, I'm not good enough. It's all my fault. I always have to do it alone. There's never enough. I can't show how I feel, whatever it is. And this is what lives on, right? This is the content of your south node. So when you think of your south node and again, in evolutionary astrology, which is the main form of astrology that I practice, and specifically the framework that I'm speaking to you today from, we look specifically at Pluto and the nodes as the backbone of the chart, which is going to show you much deeper what you came into this life with already. This life was not the origin. You were not born a blank slate. You come in preconditioned. So the archetypes of your south node by house and sign, and it gets more complicated in evolutionary astrology as we add in the rulers. And I'm going to give you an example so you'll get to see a little bit of it in play. All of that is going to have this kind of content. All of these past life selves that had all of these negative, emotionally laden thoughts. Then we get to the other side, which is a vasana. And in Vedanta, they describe vasana, which is quite interesting, as like a fragrance that's the smell of a fragrance left behind on a cloth. It's very subtle. It's not even the fragrance itself. It's the trace of the fragrance left behind on a cloth. This is a vasana. These are tendencies, conditionings, predispositions, emotional reactions from the past that live within us, and they are the content of your Pluto, right? Pluto by house and sign is going to show you that these deep kind of tendencies, these emotional security patterns, subconscious emotional security patterns that have been formed life after life after life, a bottom line kind of psychology. This is the basis of Pluto. Okay. Let me just stop and see if there's any questions. I also need to keep an eye on time here.
We're good at the moment. I think some of the questions you're in the process of answering anyway. So thank you.
Okay, great. All right, let me give you an example. So again, like I said, can you see my mouse? Yes?
Yes, thank you.
Great, thank you. So as I said, in evolutionary astrology, we're going to look at the bottom line here. I'm going to look at Pluto, and then I'm going to look at the nodal axis. I'm going to look at the planets with the nodes. And in this case, we have Sun and Neptune square the nodes, which is a special rule in evolutionary astrology called the skip step. And when a planet or planets square the nodes, it generally changes the rules of just moving from south node to north node, but that's a little too complex for this case study. So I'm just going to talk to you about this from present life to past life. This is a client who came, I'll just tell you her life story or the issue that we worked on. She was a little girl in second grade, and she had this crush on this really popular boy. And now, how old are we in second grade? In the US, it's like 7, 8 years old. And she had this crush on this little boy, very popular little boy. She didn't feel very popular herself. And she ran after him on the playground, trying to chase him and kiss him. And when she was doing that, all the other kids watched and they laughed at her. Now think of it, right? Look at this Mars, Mars on the south node. Leo, we know, is like an expression of our heart, right? And so here she is in her kind of pure libidinal energy, just going for her heart's desire, right? And she tries to kiss this boy, and all the kids see it and they laugh at her. And they continue to tease her for weeks, and she gets this bad reputation. So on top of it all, she's in Catholic school. So it's very taboo in Catholic school, even for, to show that kind of expression of eros, right, or libido. But on top of that, she's a girl pursuing a boy. So she was humiliated because of this, right? So think of the sixth house, right? The Virgo overlay on the Leo archetype. She was humiliated. And that formed a trauma, of course. And that continued to replay in her life, right? So she constantly found herself in these imprints of spontaneous, kind of impulsive actions that were then met with shaming, right? So she was locked in that loop of, I need to express myself, but I meet shame. I can't get my heart's desire, right? And that's what formed, right? This kind of complex around relating an expression of her heart, which we might say is a rejection complex. So I went back to her. Uh, I did some work with her on the current life inner child, but then we followed it to an even deeper memory. Where did this complex form? It didn't form in this life. It was re-triggered in this life and reconstellated in this life, but there was another life behind it. So we went back to another lifetime, and she was a young child in a large family, living in your average village, kind of European village, not medieval, but yeah, not quite modern century either. And she's the youngest of several children. She's often overlooked. She's not noticed. And if you see here, this Neptune conjunct the sun, square the nodes, right? Talk about not being noticed. Generally, Neptune, you can't even see you. So she kind of raised herself, right? Saturn conjunct the south node. And her parents were in small town kind of politics, socially ambitious, certainly wanting to do better for themselves and kind of climb the social ladder. Her father resented the children, and here she is, youngest of all of these kids, and he always made all the kids feel like a liability. He drank, he was abusive. He worked in a gentleman's estate. I don't know what his position was. This is father, worked in a gentleman's estate, and then was, also, trying to have a good reputation so that he'd get a higher position. And he was just about at that point in his life, father, where he was kind of climbing the social ladder. And she, looking for love, this young girl at 14 years old, falls in love with this boy. The boy is a young boy who was sent to train in the priesthood. He was, I guess they call him a acolyte or whatever it is before they're a priest. And he also felt unloved. He was kind of sent off to the priesthood, and they bonded through this feeling unloved, right? And they formed this really strong bond, but it was a secret relationship, of course. Now we get to this real Pluto here, right? Pluto in the seventh house. She's got to have this covert relationship that there's some kind of Virgo criticism or shame over. Now, Uranus is conjunct, and guess what happens? She gets pregnant. She's 14 years old, suddenly pregnant. And then father finds out, and here's father all concerned about their social standing, and he is enraged, and he beats her, and then he tells mother, send her away to somebody who can take care of it. Now, back in those days, there weren't abortion clinics, but there were, little old ladies in the woods that played with herbs. And so the mother takes her out of the village. So she's outcast, right? This is very Aquarian archetype of being outcast. She's outcast and she's taken to this woman in the woods. And this woman, she's left there. And this woman is treating her with herbs and accidentally ends up, guess what? Thinking Scorpio, right? Scorpio and Neptune up here squaring the nodes, accidentally poisons her, overdoses her with these drugs, and she dies. So she dies. Think of all the uncompleted impulses she might die with. First she died pregnant. She died with this unfinished love, this shame, this guilt, and anger, right? Mars, look at Mars. Mars is opposing the south node, conjuncting the north node, and she's angry. So when we look at this chart, she's meant to look at the Mars conjunct the north node. She's meant to continue to follow her heart, but there's been all these wounds to her giving and receiving of love. She needs to recover this life force. But in this case, what we can see are kind of the two ways that the complex is played out. When she was younger, she did it in a very Mars way, right? She did this complex, like just going for what she wanted impulsively, and then again, replaying that, getting shut down, getting shamed, not being able to find that kind of love. So then later in her life, as that re-imprinted, as I explained before in her current life, as that re-imprinted, she did more of the Saturn side where she repressed it. And how would you do that when you repress it, right? Her suppression became her defense. And then what she did is she would reject anybody before they got to reject her, right? That's a kind of classic Virgo thing, right? I'm going to be critical of people before they can be critical of me and reject me. Now, all of this energy of rejection can be very Virgo, can be sixth house, also be very Scorpio too, right? Scorpio, we know this is our deepest vulnerabilities, wants to keep it away. So I'm going to put up this defense. And so we can see just from this case how these things have imprinted and both ways that she played it out. Okay, so let me just stop for a minute. I'm going to take a break soon because I need to look at the time. Yeah, we're going to need to I want to get to setting you up for an exercise. So let's get a few questions and then we will take a break.
Nothing that's popped up recently, actually.
Okay, all right. So let me see where I'm at. You know what? Let's take a break and come back with that, okay?
Wonderful. Do you want 5 minutes, a bit longer?
Yeah, let's take 5 minutes and then I'll come back and set you guys up for having an inner experience.
Should we have a Sagittarian 5 minutes up to the hour, which is about 6 or 7 minutes?
Yeah, let's do that. All right, we'll see you
Okay,
soon.
thank you.
Bye. Sure.
One was that Anastasia said, I've been taught that Saturn is the lord of karma and gives information about past lives. Is that wrong, or is it that you tend to focus more on Pluto and the nodes?
That's a kind of, I have not found that to be true. Let's put it that way. So in my book, I did several thousand case studies of people's actual regressions, comparing them to the chart, and what held true consistently was what's taught in evolutionary astrology, Pluto and the nodes. And then now I can understand where it gets that archetypally, but I've not seen it to hold true.
Right. Thank you, thank you. And in your book or anywhere else, do you have work or writings on planets squaring the nodal axis at the bendings?
Yeah, it's such a complex thing, or it's such a core thing in evolutionary astrology, planets squaring the nodes and how it modifies the whole interpretation of the nodal axis. That so many of the cases in my book were people with planets square the nodes. So I have like I said, I did several thousand case studies to compile the archetypal understanding of it. But then many of the cases that I have in the book, and there's, I don't remember how many, a lot, 50, 70 cases, whatever. Many of them have planets square the nodes. And that is generally, I assumed, or kind of surmised, that that's because when you have a planet square the nodes, it gives you a kind of karmic imperative, right? It gives you this dichotomy of this, it's like a T-square, right? But it's this T-square in your soul that says, I really want to bring this to completion this lifetime. I really want to work through this. And so that would kind of drive you to have a, you know, a deeper imperative to kind of clean up your unfinished business.
Right, thank you. And there's a final question from two people, but I have a feeling it's what the whole session is about. But Anne asks, how do you get out of these sorts of cycles? And Maria says, does the chart give you a hint about how to break free?
Yes, it does, because the North Node would point you in that direction. And getting out of these cycles, I mean, this is why we reincarnate, right? The soul itself is seeking healing. So yes, there's repetition involved. So, you know, there's a lot of different philosophies of how do we get out of it, right? It's a longer discussion. What I'm going to share with you today is a technique that you can kind of, you know, play around with yourself, working with your own consciousness. But certainly there's a variety of ways. Healing takes many forms. You can do psychotherapeutic process, you can do regression work, you could do healing work, you know, all of these different things. Anything that brings you beyond the conscious mind into the subconscious content and gives it a place of expression, a place of completion, is going to help break things up for you, help bring things to completion. So let me just move on with how to recognize karmic complexes, because some of this will answer your questions too. When you're thinking of karmic complexes or complexes in general, we're looking at behavior patterns that are hard to change. There's also sometimes at their core, they're irrational fears, they're phobias, they're strong emotional reactions to certain situations that don't make sense, right? They're definitive statements, they're life scripts. Like, you just think it's that way. Everybody overlooks me, right? We say these things. At the bottom here, I have this. This is where you really start to get in touch with them. I always or I never, just finish the sentence, right? Another way to take it further is to get into the feeling of what comes up for you and answer it's as if or it's like. I'll give you an example of that. But just quickly, also we say, like I said, there's these strong phrases or ways that we are describing something that's going on in us, which is already pointing to your complex. And these are some from clients of mine. So like, for example, an anger or rage complex. That, you know, these can be clear statements. But one guy came to me, I remember him saying, and this was a Libra Aries thing in his chart. Think about it, right? The quandary between trying to balance Libra and Aries in the same psyche. And he was saying, in order for me to claim my own space or stand up for myself, things have to build up to this point of explosion. And then I explode and I scare myself. That's a rage complex. And we did go back to a past life of, you know, where he was unable to express his rage and it took over him and then he suppressed it. And then because it was suppressed, it just kept surfacing. You know, or we have somebody saying, I want to kill someone. So anyway, the voice of an inferiority complex is often, I'm not good enough, right? The voice of a depressive, a failure, or a saboteur complex is often, I feel stuck no matter what I do. It's very Eeyore, if you remember Pooh, right? Winnie the Pooh. No matter what I do, it's not going to work. These are different voices. So once we give voice to something, that also helps personify the complex. A guilt complex. It's all my fault. You know, no matter what I do, I'm going to do it wrong, or I've done it wrong. So we have these voices in us, right? And they point also to. So you can start to think about your always and your nevers, your shoulds and your musts, your repeating patterns in your life. And then you can even take it one step further, because this is where we get to start to work with some complexes, is when we can personify them. Jung discovered this. He called it active imagination, right? Where you can take a part of yourself and let it take on a personality and dialogue with that part of yourself, right? You can explore a part of yourself, like the part of you that feels like it's as if, or it's like. So let's say somebody is like saying, I'm not good enough. Okay. It's as if, or it's like, if you ask that voice in your imagination, let me just try and pull one up. Okay. I'm not good enough. That used to be a good complex of mine. I'm not good enough. So if I say, it's as if, it's like, it's like I, it's like, I don't know, trying to complete something that can't get done. I could be like, I feel like somebody running in a rut, right? Somebody running in a rut. That's just an image that comes to me. Now, that is already a personification of the complex. Now, the next step would be to become that person running in the rut and find out, again, we can treat it as if it's current life or past life. It doesn't really matter, because as I said before, to the subconscious, everything is happening now. And when you treat something like that, going into the subconscious, allowing the emotion and the image to come, and I also want to tell you this, the language of the soul is not logical and linear. The language of the soul is image and myth and metaphor. This is why these things speak to us on such a deep level, right? Things touch us on such a deep level when they come from they touch our souls, because they're speaking the language of the soul. And if we want to heal on a soul level, we need to use soulful means. And those means are like, just like the greats in transpersonal psychology or psycho-spiritual understanding. We need to speak the language of the soul. We need to use the tools of the soul. And some of that is using imagery, using imagination, right? Because again, it's all happening now. So when we can let those images arise, classic example would be like a woman comes and she goes, no matter what I do, the work is never done, and my husband treats me, I make dinner and the kids want me to wash the clothes and blah, blah. And if I said to her, it's as if, or it's like, and she would say, I feel like a slave. Bang. That's a great image to work with. Become that slave. Let's work with that slave. Is it a literal past life? It might be. Now, again, I've been doing regression therapy for 20 years. I don't need to get into the discussion of, are past lives real or not? I've seen enough proof to know that they are, but to the subconscious, it doesn't really matter, right? So I'm not going to take you through regression here. But I'm going to take you through an exercise where we're going to touch on to this personification of one of these complexes. And this is what Jung was talking about here. Jung was saying, hold on, I need to move this guy so I can read it. As we know, a complex can be really overcome only if it's lived out to the full. In other words, if we are to develop further, we have to draw to us and drink down to the very dregs what, because of our complexes, we have held at a distance, right? We have to enliven it. We have to give it juice, let it have juice in our consciousness. And that's the beginning of unwinding a complex. Further, a complex can be healed when its emotional content is discharged and assimilated emotionally. And what I always say is, either you run your complexes or your complexes run you. And what does it mean to run a complex? Exactly what I was talking about before. You run a complex by using, say, example, this principle that Jung was talking about, active imagination. We run a complex when we allow something to come to life into the conscious mind, bring it to some kind of completion, let it express itself, get out the impulse, and then it settles. We bring it to a higher octave. Okay, let me just see if there's any questions here.
There are quite a few, but things like house system that you use, whether you used other hard aspects apart from the conjunction, square, opposition.
Porphyry house system is evolutionary astrology specifically. And again, I've seen cases where that works. And I find most relevant to complexes and past life complexes are squares and oppositions and conjunctions.
Right, thank you. And somebody just asked, could you say something more about rage?
What about it? What's to be said?
I'm not sure.
I don't know. What about it? Could I say something more about rage?
That's designed to maybe get you in touch with it. I don't know.
Yeah, really. How about you go home and beat a pillow for a while and then you tell me about rage. Okay, hold on a second. I need to just make sure that's muted.
I think she
All
was
right.
asking, sorry, she was just asking how you live it, really, in that way. How do you live it out, I think, or get it out? Yeah.
Well, yeah. I mean, the thing is, again, women are supposed to not be angry. So when we repress rage, it becomes distorted in all different kinds of ways. And we can become, and it's not just women, we can become manipulative or passive aggressive, or these are all. So the healthy way to express it is to express it, right? Go and beat something. Again, within a container, you don't want it to come out and, where you go postal, but you want to give it expression within the context of a, of a container. So, beat a cushion, somebody you're angry at, create a boundary around yourself, calling your guides and your helpers to create a healthy boundary, and then just beat it and let it come out. Quite often behind rage, there's grief, right? Sometimes rage will collapse into grief.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thanks.
Okay. All right, so we want to get to an exercise. So I'm going to give you a minute and I want you to start to think about these kinds of repetitive patterns that happen to you. These always, these musts, these shoulds. Like I had on the slide before, I always have to do it alone. I never have enough. Let me give you just an example of one short complex that I ran for myself. Which will give you an idea. Hold on, I have some notes on that one. Give you an idea of the kind of exercise I'm going to take you through. So I went into an image, and this was not a past life image. I know this to be true. In my life, I always feel like I have a Pluto and Virgo in the 6th house, double signature with Saturn conjunct, right? So that Pluto Virgo in the 6th house always feels like it has to be productive. In order for me to be deserving or worthy, I need to be doing something. I need to be accomplishing, doing, always bogged down in details. So I was exploring these different complexes, and I did go through one past life where I was a man who was a provider for the family, and I was working in like a barn, a loft of a barn, and the floorboard collapsed, and one leg fell through the floorboard and broke my pelvis, and I was unable to work from there. And I watched, while I felt totally unworthy, watching my family struggle. I had a lot of guilt and watching them struggle because I couldn't be the provider anymore. And that was one past life that was behind my overdue on the work ethic thing. And then another one that I worked with that also had to do with this being productive was this image of a prisoner in stripes on a chain gang. Now, this was not a past life memory, but again, I run it like it is. Run your complex. So I kind of, in that moment, become that prisoner on the chain gang. What's my emotion? What's my feeling? The feeling sense at that moment was a kind of anger, yet a feeling of no choice. Anger, yet feeling of no choice, right? Because there I am, I'm captive and I can't do anything. So the key thing to dissipate a complex is to give that part of yourself, this prisoner, mine in stripes, give that prisoner a chance to do what it wants to do that it couldn't do. We'll let it imagine that it was in the past. So I could treat that as if it's a whole past life self. It doesn't matter. This prisoner in stripes in this moment in my subconscious is expressing, I'm angry and I feel I have no choice. I have to do this. I have to keep banging these rocks or whatever I'm doing on the chain gang. So now what we want to do is we turn the complex and we bring in resources, because there are lots of resources available in our psyche, right? There's all of these resources we can draw from, be they spirit animals available to us, spirit guides, helpers, right? And they exist within our own psyche, yet they exist independent of us. They're in the superego, they're in the higher worlds, they're in our soul realm, they're in our spirit realm. We can call them down into the depths of the subconscious to deal with this character. So in that moment when I'm dealing with this prisoner, no choice, angry, I call in a resource, right? And this resource comes and it's this horse, and this horse, the spirit horse, represents this energy of freedom and passion. So I ask the horse to help me, and the horse wants, so what does this prisoner part of me want to do? I want to break off the chains. I want to rip off the striped suit. I don't want to be identified as a prisoner anymore, and I want to run free with the horse in the fields naked. So, I imagine myself doing that, and I physically make the motion of this and just imagine, and I go with the horse spirit, and we're out in the field just running and feeling the wind on my body and so on and so forth. That little exercise is the kind of thing I'm going to take you through. And it's something you can continue to work with, but you'll feel the release of the libidinal energy. Okay, so that's an example. Now I'm going to take you through the exercise, but I need you to identify something in your life. And let me just ask if there's anybody that's having a difficulty with that. This may get complicated, but because I want to get to the exercise. So we have about half an hour.
Do you mean difficulty with what you presented, or difficulty with a...
Getting to what is a complex you want to
Ah,
work on right now.
right, right.
In fact, let me give you a moment, okay? Let me just give you all a moment to clear your minds, to just really, we need to get out of our headspace a little bit, right? So let's just take a moment to settle into ourselves and think about, allow yourself to become aware of a strong emotion or a repeating scenario in your life. Close your eyes, let yourself come to some understanding, some awareness of something that is this pattern that repeats itself in your life, that you just can't seem to break, you just can't seem to get through. I always, or I never, I must, or I should. And see what you come in contact with. And whatever you identify, maybe it has a voice. Maybe if you ask this part of you that always, never, must, should, if it had a voice, what would it say? How would it express itself? What would it be saying? How would you identify that complex by that voice? And then you can explore this. It's as if, it's like, what kind of character are you? What kind of character does this complex, through your active imagination, want to become, want to show itself to you? What image does the soul want to bring you to? Okay, so if you have this character arising, one of the key things here is we want to get curious about our complexes. So, like my prisoner in the striped suit, I want to find out, I want to imagine this character has a life of its own, it's living in you. We can imagine it has its own past, present, and future. What happened to this character? Let this character let you know, why is it in this pattern? Why is it stuck, angry, sad, mad, glad, whatever it is? What is this character doing? What is it expressing? Identify the emotions, feel them, become that character as much as you can, just in this moment. And now the great thing about, like I said, this character in you might be stuck in something, unable to finish something, unable to express something, maybe needs to tell somebody something. The great thing about this is you can tell this character, whatever you're stuck with, it's not happening now. There's help for you that can come to help you finish what you need to finish, help you do what you need to do. You can imagine that you can tell this part of you, it's over. It's not happening now. And you can imagine that you can look up into the higher realms in your imagination, up into the light, those light places where all the divine beings are, and the spirit animals, and the helpers, and the healers, the light beings, and the angels. And you can look up there. And you can let a helper come for this character, this part of you that's been split off, locked away, whatever's going on, repeating something. Because it's over now. It's not happening now. And you can let this being that's come to help you bring you up, bring yourself up, this character part of you up into the light, into a healing place in the higher realms. And there you can do anything you want to do. You could do what you couldn't do. Let this character know whatever you need to do, you could do it now. And do it now. Whatever it is. This healing being, this helpful spirit animal, whoever's there with you, can help you do it. Do it now. And see what else this being wants to help you, give you, show you, tell you about this part of you that can be free now. And since we're moving from the past into the present, let this being show you what it's like moving forward with this part of you freer now, your future. What does that character become as it releases what's held it back? What does that character become? Something you can express in the future, a future you. And feel that potentiality. And then see what else might come to you about how you can help this character, this part of you, continue to move forward, continue to feel beyond the complex it was expressing before. What does this character want from you moving forward? And then thank this image for coming, this character, this helping being. And feel some of what was opened up to you. Integrate within you, taking it in, breathing it in, some of the healing that's been offered to you. If you didn't get anything, it's okay. This is recorded. This exercise is here, so you can always come back to it. And in fact, on the next slide, I have some text that you can help yourself with in the phases of working with this, continuing to work with it, or trying it again, in your own active imagination. So you can always come back to this, or you can sit with a friend and have somebody, or you could bring it to your therapist and show them how to walk you through this process, right? Sometimes it's hard in these situations to move from you've been at a conference where your conscious mind is so active, taking in so much information and putting together all these correlations, and then to jump right. See, I'm used to it because I've been doing it for 20 years. Just jump from my conscious mind to my subconscious. We don't all make that dive so easily, but it's okay. This is just showing you potentiality, right? Some of you may have gone right there. Sometimes beginner mind is the best, not knowing what's coming and then just going with it. But here's the stages, right? So that you can see them. You can identify the complex, give it a voice, let it become a character, bring it to life. It can be only a 5-10 minute exercise. Sometimes you'll do it repeatedly with the same complex. Run the story, get it, run it, let it feel it, become the character, and then to start the resolution, because we know this, right? The subconscious mind doesn't know it's over. The subconscious mind is still stuck there. But the point is, time's moved on, right? Even if it's something that happened in this life, definitely something in past lives, it's over. Then we bring in resources. These are like accessing the higher parts of our consciousness, right? We bring in these resources to come and help. And those resources, consider them very real. I mean, when we work with imagery, we're accessing different realms. We're moving from our personal unconscious to the collective unconscious to even wider framework. These helpers are real and they have their own wisdom. So you can open up to them and let them come and show you, guide you. Like if I was still that prisoner in those the stripes and the chains and I didn't know what to do, if I looked to that horse, the horse itself is an image of freedom. The horse would, and I would say to the horse, what do I do? I don't know what to do. The horse would most likely show me, kick it off, run, do it now, right? These resources can help you with that. So these are the steps. Let me just see if anybody wants to share anything that they experienced.
You can type in, or if Patricia wants, we can unmute you as well. But There are quite a few comments all the way up.
Okay. I can, let me stop my share and see where we are. Oops. What do we got? Anybody want to unmute yourself and share your experience? Anybody have something they learned?
If you want to, please type it in and then I'll unmute you because
Okay.
we've disabled that.
So who's Foxgloves? Foxglove, I'd love to hear from you saying, it was powerful, you cried a lot, but it showed me a lot more than I thought. Tell us, Foxglove, if you would.
Okay. I'll wait for her to say something and then I'll unmute her if she's happy with that.
Yeah, we'll unmute you if you can, if you'd like to speak up.
There we go.
Hi.
Hi, hello, I'm Chanti. Sorry, I'm still crying.
Aw.
Yeah, so if I can share the experiences, like I was just following like this knot, like when you mentioned that there was a knot, like the form. So I was just figuring out where the knot is in my body, and it was in my head. And then so I do Reiki healing, right? So I just put some Reiki on it, and it showed me first a memory of when I was a baby, and I didn't know if it was real or not. But when I was a baby, I was on just like at the, how do you say, it's a cradle? Is that the right
Mm-hmm.
word? Like the bed. And then I saw my mom was kind of like getting abused by my dad. And the feeling that showed up was the feeling of hopelessness, like I can't protect the
Yeah, you
people that I
can't do
love.
anything. Yeah.
Yeah. I didn't know whether he was abusive to her or not because she passed away when I was 9 months old. And then there's also it. I mean, it reminds me of the feeling that always popped up. You know, like when I was in a friendship situation or a love situation. It's like it hurts me so much when someone doesn't stand up for me. So it's a cycle of like not
Yeah.
being able to protect, and also like why is no one protecting me. And that feeling of why is no one protecting me was actually quite prevalent throughout my childhood, like after baby, so like toddler until high school. I always felt like I was being alone. And when we did the exercise earlier, the memory that showed up was like my 16-year-old self. And it was just like hanging around in the school, like doing so many things, being busy as usual. And so I just followed what you said. You said like, or just be that person, right? Be that image and just stick with it. Find out what she or he was going through. And it turns out it was a transitional period where I wanted to do a lot of things in life. But again, I still feel very powerless. Wanted to rekindle relationship with my dad. It was also kind of impossible at that stage, not feeling not being heard enough or listened enough because I was still young according to my family. And then there was other feeling that stands out, which was the feeling of wanting to be like accepted and loved by my peers, which sometimes still shows up until now. If I'm about to do like this, like public speaking or something, there's this nagging feeling like, is anyone listening to me, or am I just, like speaking nonsense or something? Like,
Mm-hmm.
so the whole thing was just all of the cycles or complexes probably that I've gone through, they're all encapsulated in that one tiny memory of being 16 years old.
And
Yeah,
was
so
there a helping resource for you?
sorry, what do you mean?
Was there a helper or resource come for you?
Yes, there were. So they just they invited my 16-year-old self to exit the memory, to kind of,
Mm-hmm.
you said, to go into the light. So the girl went up, And then I felt like everything else was taken away as well. So not just the girl, but the setting of the school, the building, everything was gone up, and I felt a lot lighter. And then you mentioned that, can you see what the image, or let's say the girl here, is doing now, like after she went up and she's able to do whatever she wants. Then I saw her just be herself, being adventurous, being
Mm,
carefree, not listening, not caring about what other people say, and just, do all the stupid stuff, wearing whatever she wants. Like, she doesn't care. She's just confident. And I'm like,
great. So
okay,
give yourself a cementing affirmation about that energy. I
okay.
am, you could be Popeye. I am who I am, right? Whatever the voice of that new self says, right? Whatever the voice of that transformed 16-year-old says. I see somebody typing in chat where they got an affirmation based on their past life of servitude or their image of servitude. I do what I
Wow.
do out of love, right? So yours would be, I am who I am. Well, whatever, give yourself that affirmation, and then that becomes that.
Okay. I
Okay.
am I'm so shy. Sorry. Hold on. I am who I am. Yeah.
Yes. Yes. And we see
I'll
you.
say it better later. I'll
Right. Right. I
Thank
love
you.
it. I
Thank you
love
so
it. Thank you
much.
for sharing. Thank you. Great. So again, my point being that you can come back to this. I have Saturn conjunct my Aquarius South node, and I've had many, many lives of servitude with the Pluto Virgo as well, and many lives of dying in prison or in chains or, you know, in dungeons. I always say they built more dungeons than I died in them. And even with running the full on, 2-hour sessions of working with these complexes, I still had these kind of mental prisons to break through. And so I used to do a body exercise where I would get into a little ball on the floor like this, kneeling down, and imagine myself squished in a box, which is what would happen when you've had so many lives of imprisonment and limitation. Think Saturn. And I'd be in this little box, and then little by little, I would say to myself, it's not happening now. And I would bring in some resource, right? And just, and just little by little break myself out of the box, and then eventually I'd stand up and I had to do that like almost every day because, we can get so stuck, that repetition compulsion, we can get so stuck in these things. And so you can do these kinds of things, whatever your character was doing in the higher realms, feeling released, do it, right? Use an affirmation, give it an affirmation, like I was telling Foxglove or somebody else who shared in chat about their affirmation, and use that. Use that. So I could use the example of my striped prisoner, right? I could imagine I break the chains every day. I feel free. I run with my horse. I do it every day just to remind myself to feel that new libidinal energy, right? So you can continue to work with these kinds of things. You can dialogue with those parts of yourself. But again, this is on a recording, so you can always go back and dive in and try it again. I was gonna pause before the exercise and make sure everybody had their character, but I thought, sometimes what works too with people is just take them by surprise and go there. So if you didn't go there, don't feel left out. You can go back and do it again. So let me just finish up and see if there's any questions, any comments.
I think people shared their charts and different
Mm-hmm.
experiences during that meditation rather than any particular questions. But
Okay, great. Thank you. Thanks. So we have 5 minutes, am I correct?
that's right. Yes.
Yeah. Well, let's see if anybody has any specific questions now.
Anne mentions that her daughter feels guilty about the Holocaust.
That seems like something that probably is past life, or intergenerational. I'm not sure what your lineage is, but that would be something that would happen within the context of a session. Yeah.
And Natalino asked, you mentioned your Pluto in Virgo in the 6th. He was interested in Pluto in Libra in the 7th. and wondered.
Well, did you just watch Frank's lecture? Pluto in Libra in the 7th is often, that was the chart. The chart that I shared was a Pluto in Virgo in the 7th. And, bottom line is often codependency or meeting other people's expectations, or not knowing what one wants or needs. Again, this can be modified by other aspects in the chart, like if it's square Mars or something, or you have an Aries south node. I mean, or something like that. It can also mitigate or color that past life experience. But one would say that, the polarity point to Pluto is the point you're moving to, which would be in Aries, right? Aries first house. So what does that mean? Express your will, express your needs, go for it, do it, not tied up in knots about other people's expectations. Again, if you read my book, you'll see I outlined these complexes by Pluto and the nodes by archetype.
Yes, that was one of the questions about whether you have an index on conjunctions to the South Node, but I imagine that's included.
Yeah, you would synthesize, synthesizing the archetypes. So, in my book, I wrote them by archetype. So if you have a Mars conjunct your South Node, let's say you have, like the chart I showed, that was North Node, Mars and Leo conjunct, let's just put it in the South Node, Mars and Leo conjunct, you would read the Aries chapter and the Leo chapter. And in that would give you some kind of synthesis by reading other people's stories and the kinds of complexes that come up. That would give you, then you would synthesize those.
But also simply knowing astrology, they'd know their complexes and their astrology. So
yeah,
yes.
yeah.
Could do
Orb you use for the nodes is 10 degrees. Pluto and the nodes. Well, in evolutionary astrology, we definitely use 10-degree orbs.
Thank you. Thanks so much, Patricia. I just your input and answering so many questions as well, I think has been hugely helpful to everybody. And just want to thank you for your expertise. And it's been a truly amazing end to a conference. And you really are a master at this. So thank you so much.
Oh, thank you, Frank.
So
it's always my pleasure.
Thank you. And I'll try and pick up the chat comments and send them to you, because there are lots and lots of love coming through at the moment, if you don't get a chance to read them all. So
okay.
Thank you again.
Great.
Thank you, Patricia, and have a wonderful day and the rest of the year. Thank you so much. Thanks.
All right. Thanks, everyone.